Hey everyone, welcome back. We'll be looking at a product sense question today, more specifically, a product design question. Before we begin, though, I would like to take a moment to go through some of the reasons design questions or product sense questions are usually asked. They're usually asked to test your ability to connect with customers, your ability to think outside the box, be it when coming up with certain use cases or when coming up with certain solutions. In other words, are you able to think differently from the regular solutions out there? They also test your ability to structure your answers. And when I say structure, I don't mean following a framework, but are you able to present your thoughts such that there is a logical flow? And they also do test your ability to communicate well. In other words, are you able to communicate your thoughts out loud? Do you know when to pause? Do you know when to speak up? So these are all very important. Now let's try to understand the framework. Those of you who already know this framework probably can skip this question, but the ones who are just starting their career in product management can continue watching. Circles is a very powerful framework, and if used correctly, it automatically helps you to structure your thoughts and communicate well. So let's go over this framework. First, you would need to ask questions to clarify what you're unsure of or confirm certain assumptions. You would then need to identify users or customers as personas, and you can even name your personas if you can come up with something really cool. Next, you would need to report needs or use cases relative to the product, and then you would need to cut through and prioritize those use cases based on certain attributes such as complexity, frequency of occurrence, alignment to the goal, and so on. Then list down some solutions and prioritize those solutions before you move on to mentioning some trade-offs for the same. Lastly, do summarize stating what the solution is and why you prefer the solution over the others. So let's look at a design question. Today we'll be looking at how to answer design a bookshelf for children. It's always important to understand the question at hand in a bit more detail before proceeding. It helps us to narrow down the scope as much as possible. Let's look at some possible questions I would ask to narrow down the scope of this question. I definitely would want to understand who is doing this and if this is associated with any company or if this is a standalone product. And let's assume it's a standalone product for now. I would also want to understand what's the end goal or purpose of this product. Is it to capture a segment that hasn't been captured already? Or is it profitability? Or is it to capture a large portion of market share? Or is it something else? Well, for the purposes of this question, I think it makes sense to assume that it is to capture a new segment in the market. And I also need to know what type of bookshelf is this. Does this have certain dimensions? Is it an at home bookshelf or a school bookshelf or a bookshelf at some play center? Or is it a big bookshelf that is attached? Or is it something that can be portable or movable? Let's say I can choose, and let's say I decide to design an at home bookshelf for now. And before asking questions on the type of bookshelf, it's also a good practice to clarify the definition of a bookshelf, even if it seems very petty. I would also need to clarify the second part of the question, which is, are we looking at children of certain age group or children who are special in general? Let's say I can decide this as I proceed, which definitely means the interviewer is looking to see how best I can segment the users here. And let's assume there are no budget or timeline constraints for now, and that I would be considering India as my geography for my initial launch. The second thing that I would do before I start answering this question is state my approach in answering this question, right? A typical one would be I would begin by understanding the users and list down certain personas and understand what they like to do by stating their needs and their pain points. I would then prioritize some of the pain points or needs and list down certain solutions attributing to those pain points or needs. I would then prioritize those solutions and mention trade offs if there are any, and also summarize at the end. So, this is my basic approach before I move to answering the question. Now, let's identify some user personas. These are some potential segments that I've listed down here. Obviously, there can be different ways to segment the users. but this is a potential segmentation I've done. So here it's important to consider both children and parents, because parents are the most likely buyers of the bookshelves and children are the end users. So we definitely need to understand the behavior and needs of both the segments. And children's needs and behavior tend to change pretty frequently as they grow older, right? So, for example, a 10-year-old child would have very different needs from a 13-year-old child. Here, you can see I've ignored children less than 5 years, mostly because in India there is not a dedicated bookshelf for them and they barely can read. I have divided the rest of the age group as children from 5 to 10 and as children from 11 to 15. And for the purposes of this question, I'm just considering children from 5 to 10 as they are highly supervised by their parents when compared to children from 11 to 15 and 15 to 18 for that matter. It's also important to understand that there can be different types of children within the age group 5 to 10 itself. I would like to think of these as factors representing the XY plane. For example, knowledge being the x axis and interest being the y axis. As you can see, I have four different segments representing the four different quadrants in the XY plane. And for my first launch, it definitely makes sense to go with children who are interested in reading and don't know what to read, as it would be easier to convince this group into adopting the product. Now let's list down some needs. Children, for example, would want the bookshelf to look good and also be fun to use. They would also want to be able to use the bookshelf all by themselves, which is the whole point of the product in first place. Most children do forget what they have read and until where they have read. It would be nice to get reminders on such things. Parents, on the other hand, would want the bookshelf to be clean and organized. They would also want to keep track of the books they bought, and it would also be helpful if they can get recommendations on the same, especially since they have a busy work schedule. As you can see here, I prioritize the ones in bold, as they're more intense needs when compared to the ones that are unbolded with respect to bookshelf as a product, of course. And they're also more frequent in occurrence compared to the unbolded ones. There are obviously many other needs that I have not listed down here, but these are some potential ones that I've listed. Now let's list down some solutions. I've come up with some solutions here with regards to the pain points I listed in the previous slides. Having a bookshelf whose dimensions can be adjustable for easier stacking and unstacking would be a great solution. As children tend to forget even if there is a long gap before they read the next chapter, a small tab button which can summarize the latest book they read, or even a settings option where they can choose from all the books they have read so far would be beneficial as well. A bookshelf that can read stories considering the child's age again with a button would not only be fun but would also reduce the dependency with their parents. A bookshelf with a you may also like feature can consider child's reading interest before recommending. This can be greatly helpful to both parents and children. And a bookshelf that is portable can be fun for the child, and a color changing bookshelf can be extremely attractive to them. Lastly, automatic reminders reminding the child to read during their reading time or even reminders for storytelling can be useful to both parents and children. Now, to prioritize these, I have considered both effort and impact. As you can see here, I prioritize the ones that are bolded as they deliver a high impact to the users with low or medium effort. It's important to consider solutions that deliver a high impact before moving on to the medium impact ones. High impact is usually calculated from the frequency of usage once built, and high effort is usually calculated from the manpower or the number of resources it would require to build the same. Now, every solution has certain trade offs. So, let's look at some trade offs here. There will definitely be an initial learning curve for the child to understand how to use it, and a child who does not have any knowledge would have wider interest in the beginning, and therefore it would take some time for the child to understand their own interests or even for the algorithm to understand the child's interests, and so the initial suggestions might not be as accurate. Let's look at some metrics here. Do keep in mind we are only looking at the metrics for the solutions we have prioritized here. Some activation metrics would be number of successful height adjustments in the first week or number of first book conversions from the you may also like feature. Some engagement metrics would be time taken to stack or unstack the books, time taken in you may also like feature, and the percentage of items bought from the you may also like feature. It's important to come up with a set amount of time here. If the time taken is too long, it could indicate analysis paralysis. And some retention metrics would be bought rate from you may also like feature over month on month or quarter on quarter. It's important to look at how the bought rate is changing over the months after the initial launch. It's also important to look at how the time spent on you may also like feature is changing over the months. A small decrease would indicate there is no analysis paralysis, while a large decrease could indicate something else. We also might want to look at how the height readjust rate has changed over the months after the initial launch. A more common readjustment should not necessarily happen and it could indicate some issue in the understanding of the product. Now let's finally summarize. So I looked at answering how to design a bookshelf for children, specifically children who are interested in reading but don't really have knowledge, and also the parents who are the buyers of the product. I've looked at the needs of each of these segments separately and prioritized needs such as children who would want to have a fun and good looking bookshelf and also a bookshelf that they can use on their own, while parents would want to be able to track books their children have read and also be able to get recommendations for the same. I've come up with few solutions for the same and prioritized having a bookshelf with adjustable height for stacking and unstacking and also a bookshelf with you may also like feature for recommendations. I prioritize these solutions because of the high impact they would deliver versus the low effort they would take compared to the other solutions that I have listed down. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to receive more of such videos. Thank you.